The desert evening was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against a man's ears. Daniel sat outside his trailer, an old piece of bread in his hand. The horizon glowed with the last light of the setting sun. Then he heard it, a faint whimper, soft and broken, like a cry too weak to be heard. He turned his head sharply. At first, he thought the wind was playing tricks on him, but then it came again. Daniel stood, his boots crunching on the dry sand. His eyes searched the shadows near the rocks. That was when he saw it. Small, trembling, its ribs showing through thin skin striped with faint blue markings. An alien cub. It looked half like a tiger, half like a child, with large glowing eyes too heavy for its starved face. It stared at the bread in Daniel's hand with desperate hunger. The cub staggered forward, but then collapsed to the ground. Its breathing was shallow, chest rising and falling like it could give out any second. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He knew he had little food left for himself, but watching this creature suffer cut deeper than his own hunger. He knelt, slowly breaking the bread into pieces. "Here, little one," he whispered. The cub sniffed the air, then crawled forward, its sharp little claws dragging through the sand. When Daniel held out the bread, it snatched it with surprising speed, devouring it with soft growls of need. Crumbs fell down its fur, but it didn't stop. It chewed and swallowed as if the bread was the first food it had tasted in days. Daniel almost smiled, but then the air around him changed. The ground trembled. Not a simple quake, but a heavy vibration, like the earth responding to something powerful moving nearby. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his chest. The cub's ears twitched, but it kept eating. Then came a sound, low, dangerous, a growl that rolled like thunder through the dry air. Daniel's head turned. From the shadows between the rocks, two golden lights appeared. No, eyes. They were eyes, glowing with fierce intelligence. His hand gripped the handle of the chair beside him, ready to defend himself if he had to. The shape that stepped forward was massive, tall and graceful like a predator that knew no fear. The figure emerged fully into the fading light. It was a tigress, alien, but powerful, her body lithe and strong, covered in sleek, striped skin. Her long hair fell like a mane, and her eyes burned with wild fury. She stood taller than Daniel, her shoulders broad, her presence terrifying. The cub froze mid-bite, dropping the last crumb of bread. Then it whimpered and hid behind Daniel's leg, as if the human could protect it. Daniel's heart pounded, but he did not move. The tigress woman stepped closer, her claws unsheathed, her gaze fixed on him. Her voice cut through the silence, low and sharp, carrying both rage and authority. "Why? Do you feed what is mine?" Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to explain, to tell her he only meant to help, but the words stuck. He saw the way her muscles tensed, every line of her body screaming danger. Yet he stood his ground. He held his hands slightly out to his sides, palms open, showing he carried no weapon. "It was starving," he said, his voice steady though fear tried to crush him. The tigress's eyes narrowed. She took a step forward, and the ground seemed to shiver beneath her weight. The cub made a small cry and pressed tighter against Daniel's leg. Daniel looked down and saw something impossible, the cub's tiny paw gripping his boot, refusing to let go. The tigress noticed too. Her eyes widened, just for a moment, before narrowing again. She bared her sharp teeth. "You dare touch my blood? You dare let it cling to you?" Daniel felt the heat of her anger like fire against his skin. Still, he didn't step back. He met her eyes, even though it felt like staring into the gaze of a predator that could tear him apart in a heartbeat. "I only gave it bread," he said firmly. "That is all." The tigress growled, the sound so deep it vibrated in his chest. She circled him slowly, her eyes flicking between him and the cub. She leaned closer, close enough for him to see the faint scars across her cheek and the gleam of her sharp fangs. Her voice dropped to a whisper, dangerous and cold. "You have no idea what you've done, human. By feeding it, by letting it touch you, you are part of this now." Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. The cub trembled against him, its small body pressing into his side, seeking warmth and safety. He could feel its tiny heart racing. The tigress mother's golden eyes glowed brighter, filled with something more than rage, something almost like fear. The desert was silent again, the sun gone now, leaving only shadows. The human stood still, a starving cub clinging to him, and before him, a powerful alien tigress mother whose claws glistened in the dark. The night held its breath, waiting to see if she would kill him. or if fate had just bound them together. The tigress mother's breath came out in slow, heavy puffs, each one sounding like a warning. The desert wind brushed against her striped skin, but her eyes stayed locked on Daniel. He stood frozen, his body tense, but he refused to step back. The cub whimpered, still clutching his leg as though hiding behind him would keep it safe. Shira, that was her name, though Daniel did not know it yet, moved closer, her claws gleaming in the dim light. Every step she took pressed deeper into the sand, leaving sharp imprints like marks of a predator. Her tail flicked once, sharp and fast, as she studied the human who dared stand before her. "You gave it food," she growled, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "You touched it. No stranger has ever been allowed this close." Daniel's mouth felt dry, but he forced his words out. "It was starving. I couldn't watch it die." The tigress tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing. The cub pressed tighter against Daniel, and she noticed. For the first time, her expression flickered, not just rage, but confusion. Her cub had never clung to anyone, not even members of her own kind. Yet here it was, its small claws digging into a human's boot, refusing to let go. She stepped even closer, lowering her face until Daniel could see the thin scars across her nose, signs of old battles. "Do you know what you've done, human?" she hissed. "By feeding my blood, you've made yourself part of its fate, part of mine." Daniel didn't understand. He shook his head slightly. "I only gave it bread, that's all." Her lips curled back, sharp fangs catching the faint glow of the stars. "There is no only. Among my people, food is not just survival. It is a bond, a claim. When you fed my cub, you marked yourself. Now it sees you as protector. And that, I cannot ignore." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Protector? He hadn't asked for that. He had only acted on instinct, on the simple pain of seeing hunger in another's eyes. He looked down at the cub, who looked back up at him with trust that should not exist between strangers. Shira growled, circling him slowly, her movements smooth and dangerous. "You think this is kindness? No. You've taken a step into a fire you cannot walk away from. My enemies will smell this on you. They will know you touched what is mine." Daniel frowned. "Enemies? What enemies?" Her head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing like sharp blades. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a low rumble, she answered. "Hunters, rival clans, beasts who want my cub's life because of what it is. They follow me, they hunt us night and day, and now, human, they will hunt you too." Daniel's stomach twisted, but he did not move. "Then take the cub," he said firmly. "Take it back. I don't want to cause trouble." The cub let out a desperate cry, pressing tighter against him. Shira's ears twitched at the sound, her jaw clenching. She extended one clawed hand toward the little one, but the cub shrank back, clutching Daniel's leg even harder. Her hand froze in the air. A flash of something flickered in her eyes. Hurt, maybe even sadness, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She lowered her hand and straightened, her chest rising with heavy breaths. "It rejects me? For you?" she whispered, almost to herself. Then her eyes sharpened again, dangerous. "No, it is not rejection. It is the bond you forced. You are part of this now." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't force anything. It came to me." Her growl cut him off, sharp and deep. "You speak too boldly for one who should be afraid. Do you not see who stands before you?" He did see. She was taller, stronger, faster. Everything about her screamed power. But Daniel's voice did not shake. "I see a mother, and I see a cub that needs both of us." The words struck her like a blow. Her eyes widened for a heartbeat, then narrowed again. She moved even closer, so near that Daniel could feel the heat of her breath on his skin. "If you are wrong, human, I will tear you apart. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand." For a moment, the desert air was silent, only the sound of the cub's small breaths between them. Then Shira pulled back, her gaze moving to the dark horizon. Her ears twitched. She had heard something, movement far off, too faint for human ears. She lifted her head, sniffing the air, and her expression darkened. "They are close," she muttered, her voice sharp. "The hunters. They have tracked me again." Her eyes shifted back to Daniel, burning like fire. "This is your curse now. Because you fed my cub, they will not stop until they taste your blood as well." Daniel felt a shiver run through him, but he did not step back. He looked at the cub, at its frightened eyes staring up at him, and he knew he couldn't abandon it. He clenched his jaw, then met her golden gaze. "Then we fight them together." Shira stared at him in silence, her expression unreadable. Slowly, very slowly, the edge of her claws retracted. Her voice came softer, though still heavy with warning. You are either the bravest fool I have ever met, or something more dangerous than I thought. The wind carried another sound then, distant, haunting howls that cut through the night air. Shira's body stiffened, her tail snapping once in alarm. She looked toward the horizon, then back at Daniel. Hide, she ordered. If you wish to live, stay silent. Do not let them smell your fear. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the cub close as the sound of the hunters grew louder, echoing across the sands. The night no longer felt empty. It felt alive with danger, and every second carried the weight of what was coming. The howls grew louder with every heartbeat, rolling across the desert like ghosts searching for blood. Daniel felt the cub's tiny body trembling against him, its claws gripping his shirt in fear. Shira crouched low, her ears twitching, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. Her muscles were tense, coiled like springs ready to strike. They are near, she whispered, her voice sharp as steel. Hunters, they will smell us soon. Daniel looked around, his eyes darting to the thin metal walls of his trailer. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Inside, he said quickly. We can hide there. Shira growled low in her throat. Walls will not stop them. Maybe not, Daniel answered, clutching the cub. But they'll slow them down. Without waiting for her permission, he pulled the door open and stepped inside. Shira followed, her tall form forcing her to duck as she entered the small space. Her glowing eyes scanned every corner, clearly unimpressed with his home, but she said nothing. Daniel set the cub gently on his bed, where it curled up, still shaking. He pulled an old rifle from under the table. It was scratched, rusted, and far too old for comfort, but it was something. Shira's eyes narrowed as she saw the weapon. That toy will not save you, she hissed. Daniel loaded it anyway. Better than bare hands. Shira crouched near the door, her claws extended, her tail lashing back and forth like a whip. She tilted her head slightly, listening. Her senses were sharper than his, and Daniel could see it in her eyes. She knew exactly how close the hunters were. A scratching sound came from outside. Something heavy brushed against the trailer wall. The metal groaned under the pressure. Daniel's stomach tightened. Then came the smell. Sharp, foul, like rotting flesh mixed with burning oil. The cub whimpered, and Shira turned quickly, her hand raised in warning. Quiet, she whispered to it. Do not make a sound. The cub obeyed, pressing its face into Daniel's blanket. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle. His palms were sweating, his heart hammering so hard it felt like the hunters outside could hear it. The scratching grew louder. A claw scraped down the metal wall, sending a screech through the small trailer. Shadows moved outside the window. Daniel caught sight of glowing red eyes peering in through the dusty glass. Shira bared her teeth, crouching lower. They've found us. The first strike came suddenly. The trailer door rattled violently as something slammed into it. Daniel jumped, the rifle shaking in his hands. Another slam followed, harder this time. The thin door bent inward, the metal screeching as it struggled to hold. Daniel raised the rifle, pointing it at the door, though his hands trembled. Shira glanced back at him, her voice sharp and commanding. Do not waste bullets. Wait until they are inside. He nodded, trying to steady his breath. The door shook again, then burst inward with a shriek of tearing metal. A figure leapt through, landing inside with a heavy thud. Daniel's eyes widened. The creature was huge, taller than a man, its skin leathery and covered in strange, jagged scars. Its mouth split into 4 sharp mandibles, dripping with thick black saliva. Its red eyes glowed in the dark, fixed on the cub. The cub cried out in fear, and the creature hissed in delight. But before it could move, Shira was there. She launched forward with terrifying speed, her claws slashing through the air. She struck the hunter across the chest, sending it crashing into the far wall. The trailer shook with the impact. Another shadow filled the doorway. Daniel fired. The rifle roared, the sound deafening in the small space. The shot hit the hunter in the shoulder, spinning it sideways, but it kept moving. It lunged at Daniel, jaws wide. Daniel barely had time to pull the trigger again. The second shot ripped into its chest, slowing it down, but not stopping it. Shira slammed into it from the side, her claws piercing its throat. She tore it down with a snarl, black blood spraying across the walls. Daniel gasped for breath, his ears ringing from the gunfire. The cub whimpered on the bed, pressing itself against the wall. Shira's golden eyes flashed as she looked at him. More are coming. As if on cue, the roof groaned. Claws scraped across the top of the trailer. Daniel looked up in horror as the thin metal bent inward. A loud shriek echoed above them, followed by another slam against the roof. "They're trying to tear through!" Daniel shouted. Shira growled, standing tall, her body tense with fury. "Then we make our stand here." The walls rattled as more hunters clawed at the outside, their roars filling the night. Daniel's heart pounded, sweat running down his face. He reloaded his rifle with shaking hands, the old bullets clinking against the chamber. The cub let out a soft cry, its eyes wide with terror. Daniel glanced at it, then at Shira. "We can't hold them forever," he said. Shira didn't look at him. Her claws gleamed in the faint light as she prepared for the next wave. "We fight until the last breath. That is the way of my people." Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. "Then tonight, it's my way too." The trailer shook violently as more hunters slammed against it, the sound of claws ripping through metal echoing in the darkness. The cub whimpered again, pressing against the blanket, while its mother stood tall, ready to kill. Daniel raised his rifle, his body trembling, but his eyes steady. The air was thick with fear, heavy with the promise of blood. The next moment would decide if they lived, or if the desert would claim them all. The trailer walls groaned as claws tore deeper, ripping through the thin metal like paper. Daniel's rifle was pressed against his shoulder, his breath uneven, but his eyes fixed on the door. Shira crouched low beside him, her golden eyes glowing like fire in the dark, her claws extended and ready to tear. The cub whimpered softly on the bed, its tiny body trembling. Then the roof gave way. A hunter burst through, crashing into the small space with a scream that shook the trailer. Its long limbs scraped against the walls, and its mandibles clicked with hunger. Daniel fired without thinking. The blast filled the room, the bullet striking its arm. Black blood sprayed across the ceiling, but the creature kept coming. Shira roared, leaping onto the hunter with such force the entire trailer shook. She slashed its throat with one clean strike, ripping it open. The beast collapsed in a heap, twitching before going still. There was no time to breathe. Two more hunters smashed through the front door together, their eyes glowing red, their bodies hunched and powerful. Daniel fired again. One bullet hit the first hunter's chest, slowing it. The second charged straight at him. Daniel barely had time to pull the trigger. The gun clicked empty. His stomach dropped. The hunter lunged, jaws open, and Daniel knew he couldn't reload in time. Then Shira was there. She slammed into the beast with a snarl, claws flashing. She tore into its side, dragging it down before it could reach him. The other hunter lunged at the cub. Daniel's heart stopped. He grabbed the closest thing he could find, an old wrench from the table. He swung it with all his strength, smashing it into the creature's head. The metal cracked against bone. The hunter screeched, and Daniel struck again, until it stumbled backward. Shira finished it, driving her claws into its chest and ripping out its heart. For a moment, the trailer was silent, except for Daniel's gasping breaths and the cub's soft whimpers. His arms shook from the weight of the wrench. Shira stood tall, her body covered in black blood, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She looked at him, her golden eyes sharp. "You fight," she said, almost surprised. Daniel dropped the wrench, his hand shaking. "Had no choice." Shira studied him for a heartbeat, then turned as another sound shook the walls. More hunters were outside, their screeches echoing into the night. The trailer rattled with every slam of their bodies against it. They were not finished. Shira snarled, pulling the fallen hunter's corpse aside. "They want the cub. They will not stop." Daniel looked at the bed. The cub clung to the blanket, its glowing eyes wide with fear. He felt something burn in his chest. He had known it for only hours, but the thought of it being dragged away by those monsters filled him with rage. Shira's ears twitched. She leaned close to the wall, listening. Her voice came low, sharp. "They are circling. They wait for weakness." Daniel reloaded the rifle with shaking hands, his last few bullets clinking as he pushed them into the chamber. His hands were bloody, his arms aching, but he forced himself to move. "Then we can't give them one." The trailer shook violently as another impact crashed against the wall. Metal tore, and a claw ripped through, nearly striking Daniel's shoulder. He stumbled back, firing a shot through the hole. A shriek followed, and the claw retreated. Shira leapt toward the gap, her claws ripping outward. She dragged the hunter through the hole, its body crashing inside. She finished it with a swift strike, her fangs tearing through its neck. Daniel's stomach twisted at the sight. But he didn't look away. She was a predator, deadly and terrifying, but she wasn't his enemy. Not tonight. The next wave came fast. 3 hunters crashed in together, filling the small space with chaos. Daniel fired until the rifle clicked empty. One hunter collapsed, its chest torn open, but the others kept coming. Shira fought like a storm, claws flashing, roars shaking the air. One hunter tackled her, driving her back against the wall. She snarled, biting into its shoulder and tearing out a chunk of flesh. Black blood splattered across the floor. The second lunged at Daniel. He grabbed the wrench again, swinging it desperately. The hunter caught it with one claw and ripped it away, sending it flying across the room. Daniel stumbled backward, his chest tight with fear. The hunter's jaws opened wide, ready to bite down on him. Then the cub screamed. A high-pitched cry, desperate and loud. The hunter hesitated, turning its head. That pause was enough. Daniel snatched a knife from the counter and drove it into the beast's throat. It screeched, thrashing wildly, but he held on, forcing the blade deeper until it collapsed. His chest heaved, his body shaking with exhaustion. He looked down at the creature, then at his blood-covered hands. His stomach turned, but he forced himself to stay standing. Shira tore apart the last hunter, her claws sinking deep, her roar filling the trailer. She shoved the corpse aside, panting, her body trembling from the effort. When she looked at Daniel, her expression was unreadable. "You bleed," she said, her voice softer now. Daniel glanced at his side. He hadn't even noticed the long gash across his ribs, blood dripping down. He staggered, his knees nearly giving out. Shira moved quickly, catching him before he could fall. Her claws retracted as she gripped his arm, steadying him. Daniel looked at her, his vision blurring. "Why? Why risk yourself for me?" he muttered, barely able to speak. Her golden eyes studied him, something shifting in their fire. She lowered her head close, her voice low. "Because you fought for my cub. No human has ever done that. No one has." The cub whimpered from the bed, crawling closer to them. It pressed against Daniel's leg, purring softly, as if trying to comfort him. Shira looked at the sight, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For the first time, she didn't look at him like prey. For the first time, she looked at him with something almost like respect. The trailer smelled of blood and smoke. Corpses of hunters lay broken on the floor, their black fluids dripping into the cracks of the metal. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his side burning with pain. The cub pressed against him, its soft purrs trying to ease his shaking breaths. His rifle lay empty on the table, useless now, nothing more than dead weight. Shira crouched in the corner, her claws still stained, her body tense like a coiled spring. She had fought off wave after wave, yet her golden eyes were not calm. They flicked toward the door, toward the broken holes in the wall, listening for more. Outside, the desert was quiet again, too quiet, as if the hunters were only waiting for the next strike. Daniel pressed a cloth against his wound. Blood soaked through quickly, and he hissed in pain. Shira's ears twitched at the sound. She rose slowly, crossing the room with a smooth, powerful stride. Daniel tensed as she leaned over him, her shadow falling across his body. "You will die if this is not treated," she said, her voice low, almost calm. Daniel tried to smile through the pain. "Yeah, I figured." She studied him for a moment, then reached into a pouch tied at her waist. She pulled out a small vial filled with a glowing blue liquid. Daniel blinked at it, confused. "What is that?" "Medicine," she replied, "but not for humans." Daniel's brow furrowed. "So, it might kill me?" Her golden eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment there was no fury in them, no predator's glare. Only honesty. "It may, or it may save you. Decide." Daniel's chest rose with a shaky breath. He glanced at the cub, who whimpered softly, pressing closer against his side. The choice was clear. "Do it," Shira nodded once. She tore the cloth from his side, ignoring his hiss of pain. Then, carefully, she poured the glowing liquid into the wound. Daniel's body arched instantly. It burned like fire spreading under his skin. His vision went white, and his teeth clenched against a scream. The cub cried out in fear, but Shira placed a hand gently on its head, whispering something in a language Daniel did not understand. Slowly, the burning eased. His breathing steadied. When his vision cleared, the bleeding had stopped. The wound was still raw, but the pain had dulled. Daniel slumped back against the wall, sweat dripping down his face. "Feels like acid," he muttered. Shira's lips twitched, almost like a smile. "It worked. You will live." The cub purred loudly, climbing into Daniel's lap as if celebrating his survival. Daniel stroked its striped fur with weak fingers, his eyes softening despite his exhaustion. "Guess I'm stuck with you now, huh?" Shira watched the scene, silent. Her golden eyes softened slightly, though she tried to hide it. For the first time, she spoke without anger in her voice. "My mate died protecting this cub. My clan betrayed me, calling it weak. We have been hunted since. I trust no one." Her voice dropped lower. "Yet it trusts you." Daniel looked up at her. She wasn't just a predator. She was a mother, alone and carrying a burden too heavy for one heart. He nodded slowly. "I lost family too," he said quietly. "War took them. Since then, I've just been surviving, alone." Shira tilted her head, studying him with strange intensity. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavy, not with fear, but with something unspoken. The cub purred louder, as if it sensed the bond growing. But outside, the desert was not silent for long. A distant roar echoed through the night, deeper and louder than before. Shira stiffened instantly, her claws sliding out again. She moved to the broken door, her body tense. Daniel forced himself to stand, his wound aching but his spirit firm. "They're still out there," he said. Shira's tail lashed sharply. "Yes, more of them, stronger. They will come again before the night ends." Daniel grabbed the wrench from the floor, gripping it tightly. "Then we'll be ready." Her gaze shifted to him, and for once, there was no scorn. Instead, there was respect. "You are reckless, human, but you fight with fire. My people honor that." Daniel gave a weak grin. "Guess that makes me one of your people, then." Her eyes flashed with something he could not name, and she turned away quickly. She crouched near the wall, listening again. The cub climbed onto the bed, curling up but keeping its eyes open, as if it understood danger was still close. The night stretched on, filled with tension. Every creak of the trailer, every whisper of the wind felt like a warning. Daniel and Shira stood watch together, side by side, weapons ready. Hours later, when the desert seemed calm, Daniel finally spoke again, his voice low. "Why do they want the cub so badly?" Shira's eyes stayed on the horizon, her voice like stone. "Because it is more than just my child. It carries a gift, a power feared by many. They believe if they take it, they will control what is to come." Daniel frowned, gripping the wrench tighter. "Then we can't let them." Shira finally turned to look at him. Her golden eyes glowed softly in the dark. "No, we cannot." For the first time, she did not say I. She said we, and Daniel understood then. He was no longer just a bystander. The moment he offered bread, his fate had been sealed. Now their lives were bound together, whether they liked it or not. The cub purred again in its sleep, as if agreeing with the bond that neither of them could deny. The night grew heavier, the desert air thick with silence. But Daniel knew it was the kind of silence that meant danger. He stood near the broken doorway of his trailer, the wrench still in his hand. His side throbbed from the wound, but the strange medicine Shira had used kept him on his feet. Across from him, she crouched low, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark, scanning every movement outside. The cub lay curled on the bed, pretending to sleep, but twitching its ears at every sound. It understood more than a normal child would. Its small body trembled whenever the desert wind carried strange howls. Shira's tail flicked sharply. "They are moving," she whispered, her voice like a growl. "Not far. They gather for another attack." Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. "How many this time?" Her ears twitched. "Too many. More than before." Daniel looked around the trailer. The place was half destroyed already. The roof had holes, the door hung twisted, the walls bent where claws had ripped through. They couldn't hold out here for long. He swallowed hard and forced his voice steady. "Then we make them pay for every step they take." Shira's eyes flicked to him. There was no scorn this time, no doubt, only a brief flash of respect. She nodded once. "Then we fight." Daniel began gathering whatever scraps he could find. Old wires, broken glass bottles, spare metal pieces. He worked quickly, his hands moving with the focus of a man who had fixed machines his whole life. Shira watched, confused at first, until she saw the shape of his work. Traps. He tied wires across the broken doorway, sharpened the ends of metal pieces into jagged spikes, and scattered glass under the windows. Shira tilted her head, impressed despite herself. "Clever for one with no claws," she muttered. Daniel gave a small, grim smile. "Humans don't survive by being the strongest. We survive by being stubborn and tricky." The cub let out a small purr at his words, as if agreeing. Moments later, the sound of footsteps shook the ground. Heavy, many, moving fast. Daniel's stomach tightened. Shira's ears went flat, her muscles tensed. Then the first roar split the night, shaking the trailer. The hunters were here. The wall crashed inward as a massive hunter slammed into it. Its claws tore through metal, but then it screamed in pain, wires snapping tight around its throat. It thrashed, blood spraying, until Shira leapt forward and tore it down with one swift strike. Another hunter charged through the doorway. Its foot caught on the jagged spikes Daniel had buried under the sand. It stumbled, and Daniel swung the wrench with all his strength, smashing its head sideways. Shira finished it, claws ripping through its chest. The trailer filled with chaos. Hunters clawed at the walls, trying to break through. One shoved its head through the window, but its throat met a shard of glass Daniel had wedged there. It gurgled and fell back. Shira moved like lightning, striking down every creature that dared step inside. But there were too many. For every one they killed, two more circled the trailer, their glowing eyes flashing in the dark. The sound of screeches and roars filled the desert night, endless and sharp. Daniel fought with everything he had. His arms burned, his breath came ragged, but he swung the wrench again and again, refusing to stop. Each time he thought he would fall, he looked at the cub and found new strength. Shira roared louder than the hunters, her claws tearing through flesh, her body moving with fury. But even she began to slow, her breaths heavy, her movements strained. She was strong, but she was only one. Then, in the middle of the chaos, the cub screamed. It was not the weak cry of a child, but a sharp, piercing roar that froze every creature in the room. The hunters stopped for a second, their eyes wide. Daniel and Shira both turned, stunned. The cub stood on the bed, its small body glowing faintly. Strange energy rippled from its chest, shaking the walls. Its stripes lit up like fire, its eyes burning brighter than ever before. Daniel shielded his face from the sudden light. Shira froze, her golden eyes wide with shock. "No, not now," she whispered. The energy burst outward in a wave. Every hunter inside the trailer screeched in pain, their bodies convulsing. The ones outside stumbled back, howling. The trailer rattled as if the desert itself was shaking. Daniel's heart raced. He looked at the cub, who stood trembling, power spilling from its tiny frame. This was what Shira had warned him about. This was the gift, the curse. The hunters outside screeched in fear. One by one, they began retreating into the night, their glowing eyes vanishing into the distance. The corpses of the fallen twitched on the floor, their black blood soaking into the sand. The desert fell silent again. Daniel lowered his arms slowly, his ears still ringing from the burst of sound and energy. He looked at the cub, who had collapsed back onto the bed, its body limp from exhaustion. Shira rushed forward, scooping the cub into her arms. Her expression was fierce but shaken. She held it close, her tail wrapping around protectively. "It awakened," she whispered, more to herself than to Daniel. "The power is already inside. That is why they hunt it." Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, his body aching from the fight. He stared at her, then at the cub. "And now?" he asked, his voice raw. Shira looked at him with fire in her eyes. "Now they will come back, stronger in greater numbers, and they will not stop until either we are dead or they are." The cub stirred weakly in her arms, its glowing stripes fading back to normal. It whimpered softly, pressing its face into her chest. Shira's hard expression softened, if only for a moment. Daniel pushed himself upright, gripping the wrench tighter. His whole body screamed for rest, but he ignored it. He met Shira's eyes. "Then we make our stand." She studied him for a long moment, her golden gaze sharp, searching. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Yes, together." The desert outside was calm again, but both of them knew it would not last. The hunters had been driven off for now, but their hunger was not gone. Soon they would return. And when they did, the human, the tigress mother, and her cub would be ready. The desert dawn was pale, the first light painting the sand in shades of gray. Daniel stood outside the trailer, leaning against a broken wall, his body aching but his grip firm on the wrench he refused to let go of. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breath came heavy, but he was still standing. Inside, the cub slept soundly, curled in Shira's arms, exhausted from the burst of strange power it had unleashed during the night. Shira's golden eyes never left the horizon. Her ears twitched with every whisper of the wind. She had not slept. She would not sleep until the danger was gone. When Daniel finally stepped back inside, she glanced at him, her voice low. "They will come again." The cub revealed too much. Now every hunter within 100 miles will know. Daniel dropped into the chair, his body sinking under the weight of exhaustion. "Then we can't stay here." Her claws tapped softly against the metal wall. "No, we must move. But if we move, they will follow us across the sands. If we stay, they will surround us. Either way, the fight is not finished." Daniel rubbed a hand across his face, then looked at the cub, still purring faintly in its sleep. Something in his chest tightened. He didn't ask for this, didn't plan for it, but now he couldn't imagine walking away. The bond was real. The cub trusted him, needed him. And maybe Shira did too, even if she would never admit it aloud. A low rumble echoed across the desert. Shira stiffened instantly, her tail lashing. Daniel sat upright, gripping his wrench. The sound was heavier than before, deeper, shaking the sand. It wasn't just hunters this time. It was something larger. Shira's voice dropped to a whisper. "They bring a war beast." Daniel's stomach sank. "A what?" She looked at him, her eyes blazing. "A creature bred for destruction, bigger than a trailer, armored like stone. If it is here, they mean to end us before the sun rises." Daniel swallowed hard, then forced himself to his feet. "Then we end it first." Shira tilted her head, watching him. He was wounded, weary, a man with no claws and no armor, yet his eyes burned with a fire she had only seen in warriors who refused to fall. Slowly, she nodded. "Then together." They stepped outside. The desert stretched endless and empty, but the rumble grew louder. Then it appeared. From behind the dunes, a massive shape lumbered forward. Its skin was thick, armored with black plates, its eyes glowing like molten fire. Hunters swarmed around its legs, screeching as they advanced. Daniel's grip tightened on his wrench, but he knew it wasn't enough. He turned to Shira. "Can the cub do that thing again?" Her ears went back. "No, it is too young. The power nearly broke it last night. If it tries again, it may die." Daniel cursed under his breath. That left only them, two against an army. The hunters charged first, rushing like shadows over the sand. Daniel swung the wrench with all his strength, striking one across the head. Another lunged at him, claws flashing, but Shira intercepted, tearing it apart with a roar. Blood sprayed across the sand. The war beast moved closer, each step shaking the ground. It opened its massive jaws, releasing a roar that shook Daniel's bones. A blast of hot wind hit them as its throat glowed with burning fire. "Move!" Shira shouted. She shoved Daniel aside as the beast unleashed a stream of flame. The trailer exploded behind them, torn apart in a storm of fire and metal. The place that had been their shelter was gone in seconds. Daniel coughed, rolling in the sand, the heat scorching his skin. He forced himself up, rage burning inside him. That beast had destroyed the only safe place they had left. He looked at Shira, who crouched low, her golden eyes locked on the monster. "We take it down," he growled. Shira bared her teeth. "Yes, we take it down." The hunters swarmed again, but Daniel and Shira fought like one. He used speed and clever strikes, smashing skulls and dodging claws. She moved with deadly grace, her roars shaking the air, her claws tearing through flesh. For the first time, they were not fighting side by chance. They fought like partners. The war beast roared again, swinging its massive tail. Daniel dove aside, barely missing the strike. The impact shook the ground, sending sand flying. Shira leapt onto its back, claws scraping at the thick armor. Sparks flew, but she couldn't break through. "Too strong," she shouted. Daniel's mind raced. His eyes darted to the wreckage of the trailer. The fuel tank, half buried in the sand, leaking fire. He grabbed a broken pipe, tied his last wires to it, and dragged it closer. His hands shook, but his mind was clear. He was going to make a bomb. "Shira!" he shouted. "Bring it here!" She didn't hesitate. She leapt down, roaring at the beast. It turned, its burning eyes locking on her. She darted toward the wreckage, fast and graceful. The beast followed, its heavy body shaking the ground. Daniel lit the leaking fuel with a spark from his wrench. Flames burst alive, spreading quickly. He threw the makeshift bomb into the fire and dove behind the sand. The war beast stepped into the blaze. A second later, the tank exploded. Fire ripped through the air, the blast shaking the desert. The beast roared in pain, its armored plates cracking, its massive body collapsing into the sand with a thunderous crash. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames. The hunters, stunned and leaderless, screeched in fear and scattered into the dunes. The desert was theirs again. Daniel crawled out from cover, coughing from the smoke. Shira stood nearby, her body covered in ash and blood, her golden eyes fixed on the fallen beast. She turned to him, her gaze burning. "You destroyed it. A human. Destroyed it." Daniel wiped sweat from his face, panting. "We destroyed it." Shira studied him for a long time, her chest rising and falling. Then, slowly, she lowered her head. "Perhaps you are not prey. Perhaps you are protector." The cub padded weakly out from the wreckage, its eyes soft and glowing faintly. It pressed against Daniel's leg, purring as if it had chosen. Shira's gaze softened at the sight. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but heavy with meaning. "The cub has chosen its father." Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. But when he looked down at the little one clinging to him, he understood. His life had changed forever. The desert wind carried away the smell of blood and fire, but in its place came something new. A bond that no hunter, no beast, no war could ever break.